We are living in interesting times at the moment, and that was a Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. But anyone who has gone up against psychopaths will be aware that although psychopaths are great at bluster and they're great at bullying and they're great at bigging themselves up, their most common and universal trait is incompetence. Beneath that incompetence, there's also cowardice. This is why it's so important for people in Ireland, and as well as the rest of the world, to hold on to the fact that the only thing that psychopaths rely on is fear. John Waters was brilliant, absolutely brilliant, when he analysed that the ramping up of this nonsense about masks and now the latest issue of the Gardaí being able to go into people's houses without a warrant is not done credibly and it's not done sanely. It's done because of fear. The biggest amount of fear, the most fearful ones, are in fact the psychopaths in charge of Ireland at the moment. They're in a lot of fear at the moment, particularly when they were rumbled last week in relation to the 81 attendees at the Oireachtas golf dinner in the Station House Hotel in Clifton in County Galway. That was where the cover was blown. And okay, what we're now seeing is that the Irish Times is resorting to foul gaslighting. Absolutely foul gaslighting. I didn't think they could go any lower than they have, by claiming that those who objected to the 81 golf diners behaving the way they did are part of a lynch mob. That's one of the most disgusting headlines I have ever seen in my life in the Irish Times, and it's indicative of how low the Irish Times has now gone. It is not a lynch mob for people to object to what happened, and it is not a lynch mob for people to ask awkward questions. I asked awkward questions, 9 awkward questions of Roderick O'Gorman, the Minister for Children. I still haven't got an answer to them, but it doesn't mean that in the long term I intend to back down. That does not mean that I'm far right. It does not mean that I'm part of a lynch mob. In a free society, in a republic, people use the term democracy, but the more important term is a free republic. In a free republic, people are entitled to ask awkward questions of people in authority. Indeed, it's a responsibility to do so. Any concerned citizen should do that. Those who are consenting to wear masks in supermarkets, particularly giving the excuse, well, I don't want to get into trouble, do not deserve human rights. And my own outlook on that crystallised and hardened very much so after the general election in Ireland this year on the 8th of February, when I predicted that Fine Gael would be lucky to get 5 seats back, and they got pretty much all of their front line back. I think all of them. I don't think they lost any of their front line. So the Irish voters who voted for that, they asked for what has happened subsequent to that between then and now. I have no sympathy for them. I would advise them, if anybody, a lot of people have contacted me since then, particularly since all the mask stuff started. They said, what should we do? I said, contact somebody else, because I don't have any sympathy for you and I'm not going to reply anymore. You chose this. You voted for Fine Gael. You chose this. I did not vote for Fine Gael. I voted because I always exercise my right to vote. It's a very important right. There are others who would disagree with me on that and who abstain from voting, but I agree with John Lydon, who says you should always use your vote. You should always stand over your right to vote. John Lydon's argument is that when you don't vote, you're asking to be ignored. That's quite correct. Okay, the system stinks. Okay, the system is very flawed. Whatever about any arguments that might exist about voter fraud or any of the rest of it, the reality is that the system is extremely flawed, but that doesn't mean that you don't take every democratic and Republican right that you can give, and you do. If you have the right to vote, you vote. Always vote. You stay in organisations that you have an interest in, however toxic that organisation might be, and you always exercise your right to vote, and you always exercise your right to ask awkward questions of those in power. Tony Benn said the same, and Tony Benn was right. You must always ask a person, who gave you your authority, who do you answer to, and how can you be held accountable? And that's right. So for the Irish Times, I even forget the name of the author in the Irish Times, one of these typical woke drones who works in the Irish Times now, to be saying that a lynch mob forced Phil Hogan out of his job, that's rubbish. It's a lie. It's gaslighting. It's offensive. But it should give further indication of why people need to stop buying the Irish Times. But people need to stop buying the Irish Times in the same way that they need to stop voting for Fine Gael. They won't stop that, and they won't stop buying the Irish Times. So there's not, that particular cross-section of society is beyond redemption, and they deserve whatever they get. If they have all of their civil liberties stolen from them, if they have all of their property stolen from them, if they have all of their income stolen from them, if they have all of their security in old age stolen from them, I'm glad, because they chose it. I've no sympathy. No sympathy whatsoever for people who chose that. All that I'm doing, my outlook changed, and I lost a lot of my civic concern after the 8th of February. My outlook changed then. And I switched from having any degree of social or civic concern or altruism for others to saying, how can I act in the best way to protect me and to protect my parents who I live with? They're the only people I worry about. How can I protect us? What can I do? And that has been the radical change that I made after the 8th of February. What can I do now just to protect me and my parents? Well, I'm doing everything I can, and we're happy and we're secure. As long as that's not threatened, well, then I don't care about anybody else. Now, I would qualify that slightly by saying other people who are refusing to wear masks. I met 2 mask refusers today for the first time. And I gave them my contact details, and I said, you've got to stay in touch. Let me know how I can help you any way I can. So they're people who are out of the box. And, they're my tribe, really. If you're not wearing a mask, you're in my tribe. I was approached last Sunday, by some cunt who was wearing a mask. And he was wearing a mask out jogging on his own. And immediately I just said to myself, that person's a cunt. It's not a person. That's, I'm not going to deal with that. Just wearing a mask out on your own while jogging, you've said enough. You've said enough. So, I dealt appropriately with that individual at the particular time. I wasn't abusive or aggressive, but I wasn't giving anything, and I wasn't willing to engage. You don't engage with that kind of thing. You don't engage with that kind of thing. It's somebody wearing a mask or they're out fucking jogging. They deserve whatever they get. But the broader picture and the broader thing that is emerging is that the people who were duped into wearing masks, they have to wear them now pretty much. There'll be people wearing masks around Ireland now for the next 5 years. And they've been made a fool of. They know they've been made a fool of. That's why they're taking it out on me, because they know I haven't been made a fool of, and they're resentful of me. What we're seeing now is that the pubs are still not going to be allowed to reopen, and that the mainstream media, primarily RTE and the Irish Times, have now decided it is time to move on. It is time to move on and let go from the issue of the 81 Oireachtas golfers who flouted all the rules and who made an open mockery of the people who thought that this was valid. But then there is that argument that I have, that those people who were mocked deserved it, that they chose it. They chose this. They voted Fine Gael. They allowed 35 members of Fine Gael to return to the Dáil in February. And then we have this very, very hungry and desperate individual, Micheál Martin, who wanted to become Taoiseach at any cost. He just really wanted the mantle of Taoiseach. So it's hard to say which of them, Micheál Martin or Leo Varadkar, has demeaned the office of Taoiseach worse. I would actually say Micheál Martin, and it's interesting to see when one goes online the amount of anger towards Micheál Martin, because people expected better. Anybody who's not in the Montrose loop for the past 3 years has said Varadkar's a write-off. Varadkar's a useless piece of shit. It's only Montrose and the Irish Times that keep him going. But people expected better of Micheál Martin. I expected better of Micheál Martin. Cheerleaders of Micheál Martin in publications like the Sunday Independent were saying, Micheál, still waters run deep. You wait till he becomes Taoiseach and you won't know what hit you. Well, he's actually just a used mask, isn't he? He's a soiled nappy. He's useless. Because if Micheál Martin had one modicum of self-respect, which he doesn't have, if he had it, he wouldn't have been so hungry for the role of Taoiseach. But if he had one modicum of self-respect, Micheál Martin would put his foot down about Varadkar undermining him 24/7. Martin would also have addressed over the past 3 years the hostility towards him in RTE and the Irish Times. And this was apparent from 2017 onwards, but Martin ignored it, and now he's paying the price of it. He's paying a very, 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 very high price for it. He has been made to suck a bitter pill here. Because now Martin has no authority whatsoever. Varadkar is undermining Martin at every turn, and Varadkar is being cheerled in that way by his courtiers in the Irish Times and in RTE and increasingly in the Irish Independent. What we're witnessing here is a very serious social collapse. These are, to a certain extent, worrying times, to a certain extent. Although my mantra is all the time is no fear. If that was one thing I'd have tattooed in my back, I don't have any tattoos, I'm not going to, but if I was ever going to get a tattoo, it would be no fear. Because all of these gowls rely upon fear. At the same time, though, what we are witnessing is that Ireland's public sector is collapsing. It's collapsing in waste, it's collapsing in corruption, it's collapsing in lies, it's collapsing in incompetence, it's collapsing in bullying, but it is collapsing. I was having a conversation with one person today, and when I told him 5 billion, that is 5,000 million euros a year, is subsidised directly from the taxpayer into the Irish NGO, non-governmental organisation lobby, he went silent. He was shocked when I told him this. The NGO lobby, conservatively, a conservative estimate, is that they get 5,000 million euros a year. Now, if we're going to waste 5,000 million euros a year, we might as well just give it directly to the people who are the beneficiaries of these NGOs and cut out the management and cut out the layers of middle management and CEOs and all of these people in NGOs. And when my computer software, when my video making software is back on track, I intend to make a video about one particular individual, a real scam artist in the NGO lobby in Ireland. I won't mention her name now because I'm biding my time with the video there. Get rid of the NGOs, we've suddenly got conservatively 5,000 million euros to spare. Let's deal with the Children's Hospital. Why aren't RTE and the Irish Times reporting on the greatest and worst single corruption scandal in this state, which is the Children's Hospital? The Children's Hospital is now 100 times over budget. And it's not just because of incompetence. That was deliberate. That was a siphoning off of public funds into an incompetently managed a deliberately incompetently managed project to make sure that certain vested interests got an enormous siphoning off of taxpayers' money. This is what RTE needs to be reporting on relentlessly. This is what the Irish Times needs to be reporting on relentlessly, and they refuse to do it. They refuse to do it. So, okay, let's have no fear, but then let's focus on, well, what can an individual focus on? Any person, what can you focus on? So you're not going to have fear, but the other trick of the psychopaths is to baffle and confuse and to overwhelm. Okay, you're not full of fear, but you're baffled, you're confused, and you're overwhelmed. So stop being baffled, confused, and overwhelmed and focus on one thing that you think you're good at. For me, social media is something that I enjoy doing when a virus hasn't been put into the only one program on my computer got a virus put into it, which was the Premiere Elements video editing software that I used for the John Waters video. Nothing to see here. But I'm focusing on using social media to highlight the rottenness of RTE and the Irish Times. That's good enough for me. I don't need to do anything else, because if I focus on that, that's enough. People need to ask themselves, what can I focus on? People are talking about protests and going on protest marches. No, don't go on protest marches. If you want to protest about the masks, just don't wear one at all, ever. That's my protest. I'm doing that as a protest. I was talking to some kids going back to school, and they said they're terrified about going back to secondary school. I said, don't go back. What do you mean by that? I said, what do you think don't go back to school means? Don't go back. Oh, but we have to. Who says? Our parents. Well, I said, raise it with them. Raise it with them, because, what are you going back to school for? You're going back for chaos, you're going back for woke indoctrination. Can you read and write? Can you read and write? Are you able to count? If you can read, write, and count, you don't need to go to school. And besides, they don't teach reading, writing, and counting in school anymore. They teach woke propaganda. So there's no need to go to school. Even primary school, I'd say no. Forget about it. This ties on to the other issue of schooling at home. You have a constitutional right to teach your children at home in Ireland. You have to teach them. But I'd say to anybody, look, if you want to comply with your legal obligations, make sure that your children can count, make sure that they can read, and make sure that they're literate. The Department of Education will get off your case if you do that.